Welcome to the EPG Pathshala's linguistics course. I'm Prabal Dasgupta of the Indian Statistical Institute, Kolkata. I'm responsible for the paper called Morphology and Syntax. In this session, we shall deal with module 26, which is on further non-canonical processes. Canonical is an informal term that refers to standard, default, ordinary processes that use garden variety mechanisms that one is familiar with or that you see very frequently in the languages of the world, or that you can easily deal with, such as nominative subjects which control verb agreement and so on. In the preceding module, we have looked at non-canonical subjects carrying the ergative or dative or genitive case. Some of these subjects are experiencers, which is the opposite of agents. An agent is someone who does something. An experiencer is someone to whom things happen. So you are looking at degrees of agency, degrees of taking the initiative to make things happen, concerned with the variability of the subject marking. We also looked at other kinds of diversity in what can be a subject, but that is not of concern here. What is of concern is that in this module we shall begin by asking the same question about the variability of objects, where it is greater or reduced agency that concerns the variability of subjects, semantically speaking. Likewise, in the case of objects, there is another semantic dimension along which the variability takes you up and down. It has to do with specificity. Specificity is not an issue for subjects, but it is an issue for objects. Consider the contrast between the Bangla and Hindi Urdu examples in 1, which do not carry object case marking of an overt kind, and the Bangla and Hindi Urdu examples in 2, which do carry such case marking. We begin with the Bangla examples. All these sentences have the meaning, we took the coconuts there. So in Bangla you have a contrast between Amra narkel gulo, the coconuts, পৌঁছে দিয়েছি, versus আমরা নারকেলগুলোকে কোকোনাটস অবজেক্ট মার্কিং পৌঁছে দিয়েছি। In Hindi Urdu, you have an additional contrast. The contrast between हमने नारियल पहुंचा दिए, where नारियल coconuts does not carry an overt case marker, and हमने नारियलों को पहुंचा दिया, where नारियलों को carries the case marker को, is not the only formal difference between the two. The additional difference is that sentence 1H has the verb पहुंचा दिए agreeing in gender and number with nariyal, which is masculine plural. So the verb is in the masculine plural. Whereas 2H, nariyalon ko pahuncha diya, pushes the verb into the default third person singular masculine agreement that you get when the verb doesn't agree with anything at all. Why is there default agreement in sentence 2H? Because the moment you attach an overt case marker ko to the object, the result for the grammar of the sentence is that the object is no longer able to control agreement in this ergative sentence pattern, where otherwise it is the object that controls the gender and number agreement on the verb. Bangla not having ergativity, there is no occasion to see such a contrast between sentences 1B and 2B. That is why we have given both the Bangla and the Hindi Urdu examples. When you go to sentence 3, in Hindi you say हमने रीता को पहुंचा दिया, we took Rita there. You cannot say हमने Rita पहुंचा दी, where Rita would not have a case marker. Likewise in Bangla, you get Amra Rita ke पहुंचे दिएছি for the same meaning. We cannot say Amra Rita पहुंचे दिएছি. When you turn to sentence 4, Bangla Amra cha khaina, we don't drink tea, which cannot take the form Amra cha ke khaina with the case marker ke. The Hindi for the phenomenon is Hum chai nahi peete. You cannot say Hum chai ko nahi peete. The way things work, if you look at the bunch of data given, is that Indian language direct objects require overt accusative marking if they are animate, like the Rita example. They are optionally case marked if they are animate but definite or specific, as in the coconuts. If you have a non-specific inanimate object, as in tea drinking, the object has to appear bare. What does it mean when we say specific? The difference between specific and definite is that specific has to do with a property that both indefinites and definites can share. In a sentence like, to take the classical example of specificity, John wants to marry a Swede. In other words, a person from Sweden. There is ambiguity between the reading, John wants his partner to be from Sweden and does not care who the partner is. That's the non-specific reading of John wants to marry a Swede. And the specific reading is there's a particular person from Sweden whom John wants to marry. Here you will notice that the object of marry is indefinite. One is saying a Swede, not the Swede. However, this indefinite object can be either specific or non-specific. In other words, it may refer to an entity that the listener is familiar with or is presumed to be familiar with, which makes the entity specific, or it may not do so, which makes the entity non-specific. The question becomes slightly more complicated in definite cases, so for the time being we shall set it aside. We are doing this just to explain to you what is meant by specific and non-specific. In the exercise that we have given in connection with this bunch of data, we ask you to look at Hindi-Urdu facts slightly more closely than we have done in the main text. We have offered two descriptions and asked you to choose between them. Description A says that objects in Hindi-Urdu appear either with the accusative case marker ko or with zero marking that counts as accusative. Description B says objects appear either with the accusative case marker ko or with zero marking that counts as nominative. We ask you to choose between A and B and justify your choice. That's the exercise. As you have noticed throughout this paper, we encourage you to do a lot of your learning by solving these exercises. We have pointed out that one difference between Bangla and Hindi-Urdu is that Bangla does not have ergativity. Consequently, there is no occasion for the object to control verb agreement in ergative sentences, as Bangla has no ergative sentences. In contrast, Hindi-Urdu has the effect, and therefore in Hindi-Urdu, objects that don't carry the overt accusative case marker do control verb agreement. So that becomes an additional contrast to study in the examples we cited earlier. Nonetheless, in Bangla, there is an extra syntactic effect that ties in with whether an object carries an overt case marking or not. We now introduce you to the data in Bangla that illustrates this additional syntactic effect. You find the data at numbers 5 and 6 in the e-text. In 5, you find that if you start with the sentence, I haven't seen any birds in a long time, with birds carrying 0 case marking, in Bangla it comes out as Ami, I, Bohudin, a long time. Kono pakhi, any bird. Dekhini, haven't seen. Where kono pakhi, any bird, does not carry any case marking. It turns out I can move the word kono, which means any, to the extreme right of the sentence, producing from 5a the optionally different surface structure 5b. Ami bohudin pakhi dekhini kono. I, for a long time, bird, haven't seen any, which is not possible in English. You can't put any on the right in English. However, if you say the sentence with overt case marking on the word for bird, pakhi, in other words, if you start with 6a, Ami bohudin kono pakhi ke dekhini, where ke is the overt case marking, then the rightward movement of the quantifier kono, which means any, becomes illegitimate. Consequently, sentence 6b, Ami bohudin pakhi ke dekhini kono, is ill-formed. There is a slight difference of meaning connected to this formal variability, as we have indicated earlier. When you say the sentence without overt case marking, you're roughly saying there have been no birds on your screen for a long time, and you're not trying to individuate those unseen birds. If instead you attach the case marking K to the word pakhi, which means bird, you're saying more or less, for a long time I have not watched any particular bird with focused attention. Here, even though you're imagining a bird, you're stressing the individuality and particularity of that imagined bird. The question is how to describe this phenomenon. Notice that we are not asking you at once to plunge into the exercise of writing a syntactic transformation for handling these variably marked objects. Why? Because this phenomenon affects not only objects but also some of the subjects in this language. Consider sentences 7a and 7b. 7a begins with a subject of the verb to come. No child has come here in a long time. In Bangla, Bohudin ekhane kono bachcha asheni. 7b is the variant where the word any has moved to the right. Bohudin, for a long time. Ekhane, here. Bachcha asheni kono. Child hasn't come any, meaning no child has come. Can we then jump to the conclusion that quite generally the quantifier for any can move to the right if a subject or object of a verb does not carry any overt case marking? Is that the generalization? Is that what a transformation should try to capture? No, things are not so neat and simple. Consider sentences 8a and 8b. In 8a, you have another subject carrying no case marking, containing the quantifier kono. Bohudin ei rastaয় kono bachcha দৌড়য়নি. For a long time on this road, no child has run. You cannot turn that into a variant where the kono, the word for any, lands on the right. You cannot say Bohudin, for a long time, ei rastaয়, on this road, bachcha দৌড়য়নি kono, child has not run any. That is ungrammatical. When you add further examples to your data for all these cases, you find a pattern emerging. Subjects allow the word kono to move to the right if the verb expresses not a deliberately carried out volitional or voluntary action by a full-blooded agent, but a verb that denotes some event that transpires that affects the subject. The subject is sort of an experiencer, not exactly an experiencer. The subject is in the nominative, not the genitive, but nonetheless, the subject is kind of sitting there and letting things happen to them. Those are the subjects, or rather, the subjects of those verbs are the ones that permit the quantifier to move to the right. What we propose then is that we are not really dealing with subjects in those cases where the quantifier can move and when there is no case marking. We are dealing with objects that have become subjects, deep structure objects that have turned into surface structure subjects through a special process recognized in generative syntax, for which the standard term is unaccusative advancement. In this paper, we shall set aside the question of why the term unaccusative advancement has been chosen to describe this transformation. Just take it for granted that there is some technical term here. We can now state the transformation. We will do it for you because it is a really complicated phenomenon. We don't want to give you an exercise, let you make mistakes and then correct them. We state the transformation as 9, bare object quantifier postposing. The details are given in the e-text. There is also some discussion about why the details are done the way that they have been done. We don't need to rehearse it orally. In general, many syntactic transformations have the effect that after they have applied, some element that was earlier in the foreground of attention goes into the background, or some element that was earlier in the background moves, on the contrary, into the foreground. These foregrounding or backgrounding effects that follow from the syntactic transformations often become important either for the semantics or for the phonology or both, and they result in side effects like focusing of this type without the syntax having to recognize the focality of this or that constituent, because these are side effects. There are other cases where the syntax does have to register that something is a focus. These are not examples of that kind. When I say these, I'm just referring to one example. I should give you one more example where foregrounding or backgrounding is a side effect, so that you know that there's a whole class of cases we're talking about. You have seen passivization in English. In passivization, all that the syntactic transformation does is move the object to the subject position. And if it shows the subject at all, it turns it into an agent phrase, which is shifted to the right edge of the sentence with the preposition by. Nothing is said here about topic, focus, foregrounding, backgrounding. None of that goes into the makeup of the transformation. However, one of the side effects of passivization is that the object which was earlier somewhat in the background, having become the subject, moves into the foreground. And the deep structure subject, which was in the front of the sentence, being shifted to the back of the sentence, to some extent moves into the background. These differences of salience are a consequence of the transformation. Nothing in the passivization rule states, hello, the earlier object by becoming subject gains extra attention. It is now in the foreground. Please note that it is in the foreground. Note also that we are pushing the former subject, now the agent phrase, into the background. None of that is said in the transformation. To the extent that there is an effect to report here, it is not a syntactic effect. It is a semantic effect which might have phonological consequences, though in the particular case of passivization, the phenomenon does not have phonological consequences, but it could have had. So you need to make a distinction between the notions of foreground and background that are informal, holistic, global notions concerning the perception of a sentence on the part of the listener, or concerning the kind of perception of the sentence that the speaker intends by tweaking the sentence in a particular way, on the one hand, and the syntactic formalism on the other hand. The syntactic formalism is neither responsible for notions like foreground and background, nor does it bring about foregrounding or backgrounding effects on purpose. Foregrounding and backgrounding are not among the purposes that syntax sets out to do something about. It is not part of the furniture of syntax. Now that we are talking about passivization, remember that one of the jobs in this and the neighboring modules is to supplement the abundance of English data with data from Indian languages so that you have some familiarity with the data and deepen your understanding of how the system works. We want to show you a kind of passivization that you do not get in English, but that you get in Indian languages. We receive some assistance here from unexpected quarters because it so happens that not only Indian languages, but German also illustrates the same type of passivization. We call it non-canonical mainly because English doesn't show it. English doesn't allow you to turn "some people danced here yesterday" into an impersonal passive "it was danced here yesterday." German does. In German you can say "es wurde hier gestern getanzt." It was here yesterday danced. It was danced here yesterday. Meaning there was some dancing that happened here yesterday. Of course you can say it in Bangla and Hindi. In Bangla you say "kal ekhane shara raat nacha holo." In Hindi you can say "kal yahan sari raat nacha gaya." These are fine sentences in all the Indian languages. Now we are not introducing impersonal passives just for the heck of it and just to give you more data. There is a connection with what we have been discussing in this module. The connection is, in this module we have highlighted the fact that some verbs express volitional or deliberate action, and the subject of such a verb is an agent, and other verbs express non-volitional action, action that takes place without the subject making a particular effort to bring about the action. To some extent the event happens to the subject instead of getting done by the subject. Now when you look at impersonal passives, it turns out that that process applies only when you have an agent and a volitional verb, a verb denoting a volitional action, such as dancing. Dancing is not something that happens to you. Dancing is something that you do. Consequently, you can say nacha gaya in Hindi and wurden getanzt in German, but you cannot say it was danced in English, since English does not have the impersonal passive construction at all. English only has what is called the personal passive, where the object becomes the subject. English cannot apply passivization to a sentence that does not have an object at all. Thus, if you take a non-volitional verb such as fall, German does not allow you to say the equivalent of "it wasn't fallen here yesterday," "es wurde hier gestern nicht gefallen." Hindi does not allow you to say the same thing in Hindi. "Kal yahan girjana nahi hua" or "girjaya nahi gaya," whichever way you want to say the ungrammatical sentence. And Bangla does not allow you to say "kal ekhane pore jawa hoyni." Thus, impersonal passivization is connected to the phenomena that we watched in the case of quantifier postposing with bare objects that we have looked at earlier. If you consider sentence 14 in Bangla, বহুদিন এখানে কোনো বাচ্চার আসা হয়নি. For a long time here any child's it was not come. Coming did not happen. If you look at this impersonal passive in Bangla, it was not come by any child here for a long time, in bad English, in a format that English does not allow. You would infer from this impersonal passive that the verb to come, contrary to what we have said earlier, is in fact a volitional verb because it is allowing the impersonal passive. But you just said a little while ago that the verb come permits quantifier postposing in Bangla, and in that context you told us that coming is a verb about an event that happens to you, not about an action that you carry out. The subject of coming starts its career in the derivation as the deep structure object, and it becomes a subject through a special transformation called unaccusative advancement. So the learner will object, how come this course is encouraging the learner at one stage to think of coming as an event that happens to you for the purpose of quantifier postposing, and at another stage it encourages the learner to say coming is something that you do, and that is why you can get an impersonal passive like sentence 14. How can you have it both ways? The answer to that question is the verb come does have it both ways. When you say children coming, you may mean children deliberately making the decision to come here and doing it on purpose. Or you may mean children living their ordinary lives and somebody brings them here and they allow it to happen. It is something that happens to them. Both of these senses are possible interpretations of the verb to come. Whenever you take a noun for which one of these senses is not available, for example, suppose you consider inanimate objects such as tractors or cars or trucks, and you make a truck the subject of a verb to come. When that happens, as usual, quantifier postposing is possible. You can say truck ashini kono, truck has not come any. But you cannot get an impersonal passive. You cannot get kono trucker asha hoyni. Any truck, genitive marking, and then the passive morphology for coming. It has not been come by any truck. That is ungrammatical. Why is that ungrammatical? Because a truck cannot deliberately make the decision to come or withhold that decision. It is not up to the truck whether it comes or not. So in the case of the truck as the subject, coming can only take the non-volitional interpretation, whereupon you get bare quantifier postposing as expected, and you fail to get impersonal passivization, again as expected. When we say that the syntax is not responsible for all these foregrounding and backgrounding effects that manage to get attached to their consequences, and that sometimes surface more clearly in the phonology or the semantics, by that we don't at all mean that the syntax does not take responsibility for focusing phenomena at any level. What we are saying is all over language you find focus-like phenomena of foregrounding and backgrounding. Those cannot be the province of the syntax alone, or the syntax in particular. We certainly know that there are some aspects of linguistic structure that have to do with focusing, for which the syntax does take official formal responsibility. It has mechanisms sensitive to those processes. This is why we choose to introduce in this very module the machinery of focusing and topic marking in Indian languages. There are focus particles and topic particles in languages such as Bangla and Hindi. The focus particles come in pairs. Indian languages have a dissociative focus particle, which emphatically says we are indicating this entity separately in dissociation from anything else, this entity rather than anything else. That is a dissociative focus particle. It takes the form he in Hindi and tsa in Marathi and e in Bangla, etc., etc. And the other focus particle that you get is the associative focus particle that emphatically says one is presenting this entity together with other entities. The meaning is roughly also or even. The form of the associative focus particle is bhi in Hindi Urdu, o in Bangla, and pan in one variety of Marathi, and so on. In addition, in the context of foregrounding and backgrounding, the syntax recognizes a particular kind of background role which it calls the topic. Topic is a technical term in syntax. And there is a topic particle in certain Indian languages. In Bangla and Hindi, that particle is to. Thus, if you take examples where focus and topic particles are present in the same sentence, you get a sense of how official notions in syntax sometimes take up the theme of foregrounding and backgrounding when there are actual syntactic devices to describe. Thus, example 15 in the Hindi version, 15H, H for Hindi Urdu, is Nripen to Raka ka hi acha dost tha, meaning as for Nripen, it was Raka that he was friends with. It comes out in Bangla as Nripen ke to Rakai bhalo chinto. As for Nripen, it was Raka who knew him well. In both the Hindi and the Bangla example, Nripen to is the topic, marked by the topic marker to. It's in the background but is waiting in the wings to be connected to the foreground. In the foreground, in focus, you have Raka, so you get Rakai in Bangla. This is a dissociative focus particle E in Bangla. Or in Hindi, you get Raka ka hi acha dost tha. Again, the dissociative focus particle he. To present the whole picture to you, we need to illustrate also the associative particle. This is done in 16B for Bangla and 16H for Hindi Urdu. The meaning is, as for Nripen, he and Raka were friends too. Nripen to Raka ka bhi acha dost tha in Hindi and Nripen ke to Rakao bhalo chinto in Bangla. There is one type of example where Hindi permits the sandwiching of the focus particle, but Bangla does not. It is slightly complicated, as you will soon see. Hindi allows a determiner noun sequence where the determiner is of the demonstrative type to be interrupted by a sandwiched focus particle. It also allows the focus particle as usual to appear at the extreme right edge of the construction, thus to follow the noun. So, for the meaning, we are looking for this very house. For the meaning, we are looking for this very house in Hindi, you can either say, Hum ye makan hi, we this house focus particle dhoond rahe the, were looking for. Or you can interrupt the determiner noun sequence and say, Hum yahi makan, this focus particle house, dhoond rahe the. However, in Bangla, you have to put the focus particle at the right edge of the nominal structure. You cannot sandwich it between the determiner and the noun. In other words, you have to say, Amra, we, e baritai, this house, focus particle, khunchilam, were looking for. The complication that we had promised is that it is possible to say, sentence 20, Amra ei barita খুঁজছিলাম. And at first sight you might think that we just told a lie. Here is an example where you see the focus particle duly sandwiched between the determiner and the noun, so it's exactly like Hindi. What is this Dasgupta person talking about? Why is he denying the existence of evident facts? It turns out that example 20 is not an example where the E of A is a focus particle attached to the determiner A, which means this. In other words, Ei barita in Bangla does not correspond to Yahi makan in Hindi. It is a different structure. It is a variant of the determiner, what we call an augmented variant. Our evidence for this claim is that in Bangla you can take the structure with the augmented determiner and then attach a real focus particle to the right of the noun. So you can say 21b, Amra ei barita I খুঁজছিলাম. With ae, this augment, barita I, house, focus particle, খুঁজছিলাম, we're looking for. In contrast, in Hindi, you are not allowed to say, हम यही मकान ही ढूंढ रहे थे. You cannot use he twice. And since yahi has used up the focus particle, makan is not entitled to become makan hi. This shows that the Bangla ei barita with the e sandwiched in the middle is not the focus particle but something else. It is the augment. The reason that we are not formalizing this analysis immediately and stating how the alternation works is that we have so far not informed you that there is a contrast between the behavior of the associative focus particle and the dissociative focus particle. All the examples we have given you to show the alternation are with the dissociative focus particle. In some cases, both of them are permissible in the sandwiched position. When you look at the quantifier noun construction, as you see in the Hindi-Urdu examples 22 and 23, you can either say, I will buy just one cup, मैं एक ही प्याला खरीदूंगा, or you can have the associative focus particle bhi in the construction for I won't buy even a single cup, which comes out in Hindi-Urdu as मैं एक भी प्याला नहीं खरीदूंगा. This module has not taught you additional mechanisms and is therefore difficult to summarize formally, but we can certainly help you by summarizing the topics that we have covered in this module. If I may play on the word topic, between topics being covered in a teaching system and the term topic as a technical term in the syntax. We began by informing you that the syntax does not take responsibility for foreground and background phenomena in general. Some of them are side effects of syntactic transformations, but that there are indeed certain foregrounding and backgrounding effects that are syntactic effects that the syntactic devices are bound to recognize and describe. In particular, therefore, we spent some time showing you how focus markers and topic markers function in Hindi, Urdu and Bangla. We didn't leave that area entirely dissociated from the writing of formal descriptive statements such as syntactic transformation statements. We encouraged you to write a syntactic transformation, for example, in the case of a topic focus construction in Bangla in the final exercise of the module. However, since the facts are complex and our main emphasis was on illustrating the complexity of the facts, we most of the time introduced you to phenomena and stopped you on the brink of providing a formal statement. This is especially true for the phenomena concerned with where focal particles can be sandwiched between two constituents of a construction and where they cannot, and how in this respect the associative focal particle, that means evener, also has distinct properties from the dissociative focus particle, that means indeed. This was what we covered in this module. We encourage you especially to look at the e-text in great detail in a module like this, where all the substance is in the details and you're not left holding a few transformations at the end of the module to satisfy your need for fresh acquisitions. We also encourage you to do supplementary readings recommended in the various modules of this paper, and to get back to us with any feedback that you have. Thank you for your attention.